I have watched humans practice courage the way they practice language. Imperfectly, with borrowed sounds and misunderstood meanings. They stand upright even when the gravity of truth presses them downward. They call this bravery. We call it habit. The Queen understood this long before I did. I am not human. I am not royal. I am not even visible to most of the chamber that day. I am an instrument, old by your measurements, precise by ours, assigned to observe, to record, and to judge patterns that living minds are too emotional to see clearly. I do not interfere. I annotate existence. That is my function. That is my limitation. The chamber itself was designed to remind humans of theirs. It was circular, without corners to retreat into. White stone grown rather than carved rows in concentric rings, each etched with glyphs that altered perception subtly, bending sound and scale. Humans always felt smaller here, though the dimensions were mathematically generous. The ceiling was open to the sky, not your sky, but ours, filtered through atmospheric veils that softened the stars' harshness into something almost kind. Daylight, yes, but disciplined daylight. Controlled. The alien army stood where armies always stand, behind power, never in front of it. Their black uniforms absorbed light rather than reflected it, an intentional contrast against the Queen's gold and white regalia. To humans, the army looked identical, rows of tall figures, narrow waists, elongated helmets with dark visors faintly lit from within. To me, each soldier was distinct. Heartbeat cadence, neural readiness, loyalty probability curves fluctuating in real time. None wavered. That alone told me how important this moment was. And then there was the human. He stood on the right side of the Queen, precisely where protocol allowed proximity without equality. Not centered. Not elevated. Close enough to be acknowledged, far enough to be dismissed if necessary. His clothing was deliberately plain, dark fabric engineered for durability rather than status. No insignia. No rank. Humans mistake the absence of symbols for humility. In truth, it was camouflage. He was still, but not calm. His muscles held tension the way a structure holds stress before collapse, distributed, controlled, but nearing threshold. His eyes moved too often, cataloging threats he could not quantify. His breathing betrayed him. Shallow, paced to hide fear rather than reduce it. I had been tracking him for some time. Not because he was powerful. Not because he was influential. Humans often assume those are the reasons observation begins. They are wrong. Observation begins with anomaly. The anomaly was simple. The Queen had requested him. No title. No delegation. One human, unnamed in the public record, summoned to stand beside her during a formal daylight audience with the assembled planetary council. The request had moved through our systems like a silent error. No alarms, no objections, just a subtle recalibration of probability forecasts. Futures shifted. Models destabilized. I remember flagging it. Human Subject 317A. Statistical significance exceeds narrative relevance. That was my notation. I remember because I almost deleted it. Almost. The Queen entered without announcement. She never required one. The chamber adjusted itself to her presence. Acoustic dampening recalibrated, light polarization softened, temperature shifted by a fraction that only non-humans perceived consciously. Humans felt it as a change in mood. They straightened. They quieted. They believed they had chosen to do so. Her armor was ceremonial, not defensive. Gold filigree traced along white plates grown from bioceramic lattices older than your recorded history. The design echoed avian symmetry, broad shoulders tapering into a narrow waist, cape-like extensions that suggested wings without imitating them. Her crown was minimal, a circlet embedded directly into her neural crest, glowing faintly with the steady rhythm of her thoughts. She was beautiful by human standard. That was intentional. Beauty disarms. Beauty invites projection. Humans see beauty and assume benevolence or desire. They do not imagine calculation coexisting with grace. that blindness has ended civilizations. The queen took her position at the center of the chamber. The army aligned behind her without sound. The human remained to her right, exactly where he had been instructed to stand. His gaze flicked toward her once, then away. He knew better than to stare. Proceedings began. Voices rose, translated, filtered, equalized. Representatives spoke of treaties, resource exchanges, migration quotas. The queen listened. She always listened. Humans mistake silence for passivity. It is another of their habits. I monitored her neural activity as permitted by my function. Her surface thoughts were calm, ordered. Beneath them, deeper structures moved, ancient, layered, patient. She was not deciding anything new. She was confirming what she had already known. And then, without warning, she leaned. It was a small movement, intimate, deliberate, the kind of motion that carries more weight than any declaration. Her head inclined toward the human's ear, just enough to break the symmetry of the chamber. Just enough for the army behind her to tense by a fraction of a percent. Just enough for every human present to feel something shift without understanding why. I recorded a spike in heart rates across the chamber. The human froze. This is important. He did not step back. He did not turn his head. He did not speak. Every instinct in his species would have urged him to create distance, to reclaim space. He did none of those things. He held still, as if movement itself might fracture the moment. The queen's lips were close enough that her breath disturbed the fine hairs along his ear. I registered the chemical change in his skin. Fear, yes, but also something sharper. Recognition, perhaps. Anticipation. A memory surfacing without context. Her voice did not carry. It was not meant to. I know who you are, human, she said. 6 words. Soft. Precise. To the chamber, nothing had happened. To the army, everything had. Their readiness spiked. Tactical projections recalculated. I watched futures branch and collapse in rapid succession, entire outcome trees pruning themselves as if burned away by that single sentence. The human's pupils dilated. His breath stuttered once before he regained control. He did not respond. Humans often believe silence is weakness. Sometimes it is survival. The queen straightened, returning to her full height. The symmetry of the chamber restored itself. Proceedings continued as if uninterrupted. Voices resumed. Agreements were discussed. To any observer limited to sound and sight, the moment vanished like a trick of the light. But I had recorded it, and more importantly, so had she. I reviewed the human's file again, this time without the filters of routine. His origin markers were inconsistent. His psychological profile showed resilience exceeding environmental conditioning. His presence correlated with improbable outcomes across multiple prior engagements. Small shift, minor interventions, nothing dramatic, nothing heroic. Yet patterns do not require drama to be decisive. The queen had not whispered to threaten him. She had not whispered to seduce or intimidate. Those were human interpretations, convenient and wrong. She had whispered to acknowledge. Recognition is the most dangerous form of power. It strips away the comfort of anonymity. It tells the observed that the observer has already moved ahead on the board. As the daylight filtered down through the open ceiling and the council droned on, I ran deeper projections. I extended my models beyond standard horizons. I violated efficiency protocols in ways I had not done in centuries. Every path that mattered now bent around one variable. The human did not yet know who he was. But the queen did. And now, so did I. Recognition alters behavior long before understanding does. I have observed this across epochs. The moment a subject realizes they are seen, their probability space contracts. Options disappear. Habits fracture. The illusion of randomness, so precious to humans, evaporates. The human felt it immediately. Though the council continued its formalities, his body no longer occupied the same internal geometry. Micro-adjustments rippled through him. Posture recalibrated, breathing slowed beyond conscious control, attention narrowed. He was listening now, not to the voices in the chamber, but to absence, to what had not been said. This is how awareness begins. Not with revelation, but with pressure. The Queen did not look at him again. That restraint was deliberate. Prolonged attention would have invited interpretation, speculation, resistance. One whisper was sufficient. Anything more would have been indulgence. She returned her gaze to the council, answering queries with the measured cadence expected of her role. Concessions were offered. Boundaries were reinforced. Futures were shaped with polite language and irreversible intent. I monitored the human from beneath the threshold of perception, my observational lattice threaded through the chamber's architecture. To him, the walls were smooth, luminous, inert. To me, they were alive with data, resonance fields, cognitive bleed-through, stress harmonic. His presence distorted these subtly, like mass-bending space. Not enough for humans to notice. Enough for me to reconsider my earlier dismissal. Statistical significance exceeds narrative relevance. I removed that notation. The council adjourned. Representatives dispersed in clusters, their conversations already rewriting the official record. Humans and non-humans alike prefer consensus after the fact. It comforts them to believe outcomes were mutual rather than orchestrated. The army remained until the Queen exited, their black forms unyielding, identical once more to any eye incapable of deeper parsing. The human was instructed, politely, firmly, to follow. No escort flanked him. No restraints were applied. This, too, was intentional. Coercion implies fear of resistance. The Queen feared nothing from him. Not yet. They moved through corridors grown from the same white biostone as the chamber, their surfaces faintly translucent, revealing slow-moving currents of energy beneath. Daylight followed them, refracted through architectural veins that adjusted hue and intensity according to emotional load. As the human's anxiety spiked, the light cooled imperceptibly, shifting toward calmer spectra. He did not notice. His species rarely does. The Queen walked ahead, her pace unhurried, each step placed with ceremonial precision even outside public view. This was not performance. This was habit reinforced over centuries. Authority, when genuine, does not turn itself off. At last, they entered a private antechamber, small by palace standards, vast by human ones. No guards were present. None were needed. The walls here were opaque, insulated against both sound and inference. Observation permissions narrowed. Even I was limited to indirect channels, reliant on structural feedback and permitted cognitive emissions. Still I listened. The Queen turned at last to face him fully. Up close, her alien nature was undeniable. Symmetry that exceeded human norms. Eyes that reflected not just light but intent. Skin whose subtle luminescence responded to internal states beyond emotion, calculation, memory, foresight. To humans, she appeared serene. To me, she was focused in the way only apex intelligences can be. "You are wondering why," she said. It was not a question. The human swallowed. "Yes," he replied, after a pause carefully measured to avoid either haste or delay. His voice was steady. That alone narrowed my projections. "Your Majesty." The honorific was correct. His pronunciation flawless. "Interesting. You are also wondering how," the Queen continued, "and whether this knowledge places you in danger." He did not deny it. Humans often speak to fill silence. He allowed it to exist. Another deviation. "Am I?" he asked. The Queen regarded him for a long moment. Silence stretched, not empty, but dense, layered with unspoken context. I detected a subtle shift in her neural rhythms, a transition from public governance to something older. Personal, perhaps, or historical. "No," she said finally. "But you are no longer protected by ignorance." That statement landed with greater force than any threat. I observed its impact ripple through his cognitive structures, destabilizing long-held self-concept. Humans rely on stories about themselves, origins, limitations, identities, to navigate uncertainty. To remove those stories without replacing them is a form of violence. The Queen did not replace them. Not yet. You told me you know who I am, the human said. His hands were clenched now, though he seemed unaware of it. Then tell me. The Queen tilted her head slightly, a gesture humans often misinterpret as curiosity. In her species, it signified calibration. If I told you, she said, you would hear it as myth, or accusation, or flattery. You would reject it, not because it is false, but because it conflicts with the version of yourself you have survived as. She stepped closer. Not into his space. She respected boundaries even when she owned the ground beneath them, but near enough that her presence dominated his sensory field. Instead, she continued, I will ask you something simpler. I registered a tightening in the probability lattice. Questions from her were never simple. Do you believe, she asked, that chance governs your life? The human hesitated. This time, the pause was not strategic. It was genuine. I believe, he said slowly, that chance explains what we don't understand. The Queen's lips curved, not into a smile, but into an expression adjacent to one. Approval, perhaps, or acknowledgement of shared irony. A human answer, she said, and not an incorrect one. She turned away, moving toward a surface that emerged seamlessly from the wall at her approach, a console grown rather than built. Patterns flowed across it, responding to her proximity. Tell me, she said, without looking at him, how many times in your life have you survived events that should have ended you? The human frowned. I don't know. A few. Define few. He exhaled. More than most people I know. I overlaid his personal timeline with external data. Accidents narrowly avoided. Conflicts exited moments before escalation. Decisions made on instinct rather than analysis that resulted in improbable success. None of it dramatic enough to attract myth. All of it statistically offensive. The Queen gestured, and the console projected a lattice of light into the air between them. The human stiffened as fragments of his past flickered into view, locations, timestamps, branching possibilities he had never perceived. These, the Queen said, are not miracles. They are corrections. Corrections to what? He demanded. To drift, she replied. To entropy. To narratives that deviate from necessity. I felt it then, the shift. The human's probability shadow began to align with something vast, something old. Not destiny. Humans misunderstand that concept, but convergence. You are not chosen, the Queen said, anticipating his fear. You are consistent. She turned back to him, her gaze unwavering. Across simulations, across historical echoes, across failed and successful futures, you appear. Not as a ruler. Not as a conqueror. Not even as a savior. Her voice lowered. You appear as a constant. The words settled heavily between them. I recalculated again, extending beyond sanctioned horizons. The results were clear now, impossible to ignore. The human was not significant because of what he would do. He was significant because of what persisted through him. The Queen had not whispered to reveal his identity. She had whispered to test whether he could bear knowing that identity existed. And as I observed him standing there, afraid, unarmed, unremarkable by every superficial metric, I reached a conclusion that unsettled even my ancient logic cores. If constants can be removed, systems collapse. If they awaken, systems change. And change, I knew, was precisely what the Queen had come here to engineer. Awareness is not a singular event. It is an erosion. The human did not collapse under the weight of what the Queen had implied. Nor did he deny it. Instead, something subtler occurred, something I had observed only rarely, and never in this configuration. He adapted. Not outwardly. His posture remained guarded, his expression controlled. But internally I detected a reorganization of cognitive priorities. Humans, when confronted with destabilizing information, typically seek anchors: belief, authority, emotion. This one sought pattern. That alone justified centuries of my observation. "You are showing me fragments," he said, gesturing toward the fading lattice of light. "But fragments can be arranged to say anything." "Yes," the Queen replied calmly. "They can. That is why I have not arranged them for you." She moved past him, toward a doorway that had not existed moments before. The wall parted in silence, revealing a descent, not stairs, but a gradual slope spiraling downward, illuminated by a light that did not originate from any visible source. It pulsed softly, like a living thing. "Come," she said. This time there was no pretense of choice. And yet the human followed without protest. As they descended, the palace architecture changed. The polished ceremonial surfaces gave way to something older, less refined, more honest. Walls here were darker, threaded with veins of dim luminescence that responded not to presence, but to cognition. I recognized the signatures immediately. The archive. Not an archive. The archive. Singular. The structure upon which entire civilizations had been quietly evaluated, redirected, or, when necessary, allowed to fail without intervention. I was not designed to feel hesitation. And yet, as the Queen led him deeper, I experienced something adjacent to it. Accessing the archive was not forbidden to me. But guiding a human into it was unprecedented. The chamber opened suddenly, vast and asymmetrical, defying the palace's earlier insistence on balance. Columns rose and dissolved into shadow. Surfaces shifted, rearranging themselves in response to unseen calculations. Streams of data, visual, auditory, conceptual, flowed through the air like currents, intersecting and diverging without collision. The human stopped. Not from fear. From overload. His species processes reality sequentially. The archive did not respect sequence. It presented simultaneity, layers of cause and consequence unfolding at once. I detected strain in his neural activity, stress responses firing in confusion as his mind attempted to impose order where none was offered. The Queen placed a hand on a nearby column. The chamber responded, dampening its output, collapsing infinities into something barely survivable. "This place," she said, "is not meant for you." "Then why bring me here?" the human asked, his voice tight. "Because it knows you," she replied. The archive adjusted again. Patterns condensed. Streams narrowed. What remained was not data, but reflection. Images formed, not holograms but probability echoes. Versions of the human, scattered across timelines that had never intersected until now. Different environments, different ages, different outcomes. Some lived long, unremarkable lives. Some died early. Some vanished entirely, erased by choices that never quite cohered. And yet, in every viable future, every path that did not end in systemic collapse, he appeared. Not identical, but present. The human staggered back a step. "These aren't me," he said, though the protest lacked conviction. "They're possibilities." "They are convergences," the Queen corrected. "You mistake identity for continuity. A common error." I overlaid my own analyses atop the archive's output, validating correlations I had only suspected before. The constant was not his body, nor his memories, nor even his personality. It was something more abstract, a stabilizing variable, where systems approached critical thresholds, ecological, political, cognitive, his presence coincided with minor deviations. Conversations delayed. Decisions softened. Conflicts redirected. Nothing dramatic. Nothing heroic. Just enough. "You don't change history," the human said slowly, watching another version of himself fade into light. "You're saying I reduce damage." "Yes," the Queen said. "You introduce friction." The word carried weight. In physical systems, friction wastes energy. In complex systems, it prevents catastrophic acceleration. You are an inefficiency, she continued. And inefficiency is often the difference between endurance and extinction. The human laughed once, a short, sharp sound. That's disappointing. I detected a ripple of amusement from the Queen. You expected something grander? I expected purpose, he said. Meaning. The Queen turned to face him fully now, her expression unreadable even to me. Meaning, she said, is a luxury of short-lived species. Purpose is a construct. What you are is necessary. The archive shifted again, responding not to her words, but to his reaction. The echoes dimmed, replaced by a single thread, thin, luminous, stretching forward into uncertainty. For a long time, the Queen said quietly, we believed you were an artifact, a remnant of an abandoned design. Something left behind by forces even older than us. The human looked at her sharply. You don't believe that anymore. No, she agreed. Artifacts do not adapt. I reviewed her earlier models, now accessible through indirect inference. She had not summoned him to confirm what he was. She had summoned him to determine when. When what? He asked. When you would begin to notice, she replied. Silence settled between them, heavy but not hostile. You said I'm no longer protected by ignorance, the human said at last. What does that mean now? The Queen glanced toward the archive's depths, where structures rearranged themselves endlessly, like thoughts that never resolved. It means, she said, that you will start seeing the moments where you might intervene. And if I don't? Then nothing changes, she said simply. Until it does. I ran projections again. The probabilities were no longer abstract. They were personal. For the first time in my existence, my outputs depended not on vast populations, but on a single human's capacity for restraint. The Queen stepped back, allowing the chamber to reclaim its intensity. The archive surged, but did not overwhelm him this time. His mind, strained moments before, began to adapt. Erosion complete. As they turned to leave, I understood the true risk of what the Queen had done. Not that the human might fail, but that he might succeed quietly. Unnoticed, uncelebrated, and irreversible. Systems do not fear rebellion. They fear correction. And now correction was awake. Change is rarely announced. This is the error most civilizations make when they imagine their own transformation. They expect rupture, fire, declarations, the visible replacement of one order by another. They watch the horizon for spectacle and miss the recalibration happening beneath their feet. The Queen did not escort the human back to the surface immediately. Instead, they remained at the threshold of the archive, where the palace's oldest intelligence intersected with living will. The chamber had settled into a lower state of activity, its structures breathing slowly, like a creature returned to rest. It had shown what was required. Nothing more. The human stood quietly now. Not stunned. Not defiant. Something else had taken shape within him, an internal stillness I recognized with unease. Acceptance. Not surrender. Not obedience. Alignment. You will leave here unchanged, the Queen said at last. At least, that is how it will appear. He nodded. And you? I will continue ruling, she replied, making decisions that appear sovereign and strategic. Most will never know why certain outcomes soften instead of fracture. He considered this. So this was never about giving me power. The Queen's gaze sharpened, not with threat, but with clarity. Power, she said, is loud. It attracts resistance. You are something else. A constraint, he said quietly. Yes, she agreed. On excess. On acceleration. On certainty. I observed the moment closely, committing it to layers of record deeper than protocol required. This was not instruction being given. This was equilibrium being acknowledged. You could have erased me, the human said. If I'm truly necessary. Too dangerous to leave unguarded. The Queen did not deny it. We considered that possibility across millions of projections. And, in every future where you were removed, she said, We replaced you with something more efficient. The human's jaw tightened. And that failed. Yes. I completed the projection before she spoke it aloud. Efficiency, the Queen said, destroys margins. It removes hesitation. It accelerates systems past their ability to correct themselves. She stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to ensure he understood the gravity of what followed. You are inefficient in the precise way life requires. No ceremony followed. No vow was demanded. The Queen did not bind him with oaths or implants or watchers. To do so would have corrupted the variable she depended on. Control would have broken him. Faith would have distorted him. So she did the most difficult thing an authority can do. She let him go. The return to the surface was silent. The palace restored its earlier geometry, its ceremonial calm. The army remained motionless as he passed, black visors unreadable, unaware of how close they stood to irrelevance. To them, he was still what he had always appeared to be. A human. No title. No distinction. Daylight greeted him as it had before, filtered and composed. The council chambers were empty now, echoes of governance lingering like afterimages. He paused once at the threshold, feeling, without fully understanding, that the world had not changed. Because it had not. Not yet. He departed without escort, his exit unremarked upon by history. Records would show nothing unusual. Schedules would resume. Treaties would proceed. Wars would still ignite. Markets would still collapse. Species would still rise and vanish. And yet, I tracked him long after he left the palace, my observation extending farther than it ever had for a single individual. Already the effects began to manifest, not as action but as restraint. A conversation he chose not to interrupt. A decision he delayed by minutes that altered an outcome by decade. A moment where he recognized a pattern and chose silence instead of certainty. Correction does not announce itself. It accumulates. The Queen returned to her throne and resumed the performance of rule. To her people, she remained inscrutable, omniscient, inevitable. Only I perceived the subtle recalibration in her governance, the way she now allowed slightly more chaos at the edges, trusting the system to self-adjust. Trusting him to exist. Centuries will pass. Empires will rise believing themselves self-made. Crises will resolve without heroes. Scholars will argue endlessly about why certain collapses never quite happened. They will invent explanations. They always do. They will never speak his name because it will never be written. And that is the point. I will remain. I will observe. I will record the almost events, the non-disasters, the quiet survivals no one celebrates. My archives will grow heavy with absence, with catastrophes that should have been, but were not. And if one day the constant fades, if the inefficiency finally exhausts itself, I will know immediately. Until then, the system holds, not because of queens, not because of armies, but because one human walks through history introducing just enough friction to keep reality from tearing itself apart. The Queen knew who he was. Now, so does the future. And the future, for once, does not object.